Welcome to another episode of Video Store Rejects. This is a podcast where we discuss directors' filmographies and our favorite film franchises. I'm your host, Cody House, and today we have a returning guest, an absolute legend, and knows his stuff and knows exactly what we need to talk about when we come in. Always a great conversation with Kevin Pauley. Welcome back, sir.
Well, man, with that set up, I better know what I'm talking about. Jeez.
Well, my first question before we get into the movie itself is, one, are you a fan of either Jim Henson and Frank Oz? And if I haven't introduced this, we are doing the films of Jim Henson and Frank Oz because they kind of were a duo, even though Henson kind of gets more of the credit for the creation of the projects, but Henson also only directed 3 films, so that's why we're also going to go into Frank Oz's career as a director. But yeah, one, are you a fan of these guys?
I don't know how anybody born in like the 70s or 80s could not be. They are 2 of the greatest creative minds and talents that we'll ever have a chance to witness. What they did for children's entertainment and for children's educational entertainment, it cannot be overstated how great it was. When you look at Sesame Street, when you look at The Muppet Show, and then you look at all the films that come after, it just changed the landscape. It was writing that was smart, that didn't talk down to kids. It was writing that was also there for the parents to enjoy as much as the kids. It was storytelling and world building that never ever just completely played it safe, especially when you look at like the Dark Crystal and Labyrinth. And to me, like, there's just so much joy in everything that they do. You can genuinely tell that Jim Henson and Frank Oz loved working together, that they loved the projects they were working on. They believed in the projects they were working on. And when you have that kind of power, that kind of merging of 2 great minds, I think only success comes from it.
Absolutely. So I guess this one is probably a yes then. Were you a Muppet kid?
Absolutely. I had the 3D Viewmaster for the Muppet movie. I got the big box, the canister box that came with the Viewmaster, and then like stacks of all the stuff that basically showed the entire movie in 3D. It was great. Yeah. I don't. I was thinking the other day, like, I don't think people today understand just how big the Muppets were. When you look at the late 70s and into the 80s, they were humongous. The Muppet Show, go look at the talent that was on the Muppet Show. It's like unbelievable, the casting that they had on that show. And it's unbelievable just like how big Sesame Street was, how big the Muppet Show was, how big the Muppet movie was. Like, it just is one of those things. Like, today, I hate the fact that we're in a landscape where a lot of kids don't even know who they are. When you look at the Muppets, when you think about Sesame Street coming up in the 70s and then the 80s, when you think about the Muppet Show and all those movies, like, they were an absolute like force. And it's so weird to think of being in a place where kids don't know who they are, because growing up, my God, we all knew who the Muppets were. We knew who every one of them was. We all had our favorite Muppets. Like, it was just it was the thing, man.
Yeah, I brought this up in the Muppet movie episode. I think as a child, Jim Henson he wasn't the first celebrity I knew of, but he was like the first creative person's name I knew, like whose name was attached to the work. Like,
we all knew the Jim Henson Workshop. Yeah, it's you're right. It was synonymous with it, and that's pretty awesome. And then, of course, anytime I saw an interview with Jim Henson, you're like, wow, he sounds like Kermit. Yeah, because he is.
and I was very young, but I knew he had died, and I knew that it was like a tragic thing. And then like all these movies were putting in memory, or I distinctly remember, because I'm a child of the late 80s, early 90s, going to see Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 and his name popping up because his workshop worked on those designs. Yeah.
And a lot of people thought they may not take it on because of the fact that the Turtles were more violent than he normally did, but he saw the value in it, and they made amazing puppets. I mean, to me, the death of Jim Henson is one of the great tragedies of like modern pop culture. I would love to see what Jim Henson would be doing today in our very like polar climate. what would he be bringing to the table, with the Muppets and with Sesame Street? Like, what would be there? Because his voice was much like Mr. Rogers. There was such a reassurance to it, and there was such a gentleness to it. Yet he spoke directly to kids. Like, he never talked down to them, ever, not once. And I would just love to see what the world would be like if he doesn't die, in the 90s, and he's still here today. What would what would the Muppet movies look like? What would the Muppet, product look like? Just what would that be like if he didn't leave us? It's still one of the great tragedies. And I remember I legit shed tears when I found it out. And it was like, man, part of my childhood just died today. And that's not hyperbole. That's truth. Jim Henson's influence on my childhood is right up there with like Steven Spielberg and George Lucas. It's just as important in my early development of just who I am, my concepts of good and bad, my educational upbringing, my concepts of film and cinema. That's all there. And he's such an influential part of that. I think that gets forgotten way too much.
Yeah, I think because one, he died, tragically early. And if I read this amazing biography written by Brian J. Jones about him, who also went on to write a biography on George Lucas. Like, they said, had he gone to the doctor just a couple of days earlier, it wouldn't have been as severe as what it ended up being. So that makes it even more like, but yeah. I'm not sure what the Muppet input would have been out, because he had already sold the Muppets to Disney, like, before he died. But I wonder how much further puppetry would have gone. Even though his company survives and still works on projects today, I wonder just how much further he would have advanced it, and how much more he would have, because he kept eschewing it more and more to not adult audiences, but to everyone, to try and not just make it children specific. And oddly, the Muppet Show comes out of him working on Saturday Night Live briefly for the first season, because there were segments with puppets on Saturday Night. So he's like, I'm just going to do this with the Muppets, because that's really what it is. Yeah,
and it worked. I mean, even though he sold the stuff, I still think he would have some influence in the product today. If you look at the fact that Star Wars is even trying to bring back George Lucas after he sold it to them, like, it's the same sort of thing. I think they would be like, hey, this didn't quite work, this thing we were doing, so let's maybe see if we can talk to Jim Henson about how do we get this back on track. So I do think he'd still have some influence on it. I really do. And like you said, more than anything, just what else would he have been doing? What other shows would he have created? Would we have gotten more stuff like The Storyteller? Would we have gotten more in the universe of the Dark Crystal? I mean, granted, we got the Netflix series, but would we have gotten something before that? Would we have gotten films? Because they've been talking about films in development for so long. So I just wonder, like, what that course looks like if he doesn't leave us when he does.
Absolutely.
It's something I always think about.
And I'm going to segue into the film we're discussing today now, with you talking about bringing Henson back in as consulting. Some would say this is the best Muppet movie. Some call it the Empire Strikes Back of the Muppet franchise. The Great Muppet Caper, which is Jim Henson's directorial debut. Feature film directorial debut. I believe he did a short film back in the 60s.
He did, and it's very trippy if you ever get to see it. It's really cool.
But he wanted to direct the Muppet movie, but Frank Oz and one of the producers were like, dude, you're going to have to be doing so much other things. You don't need to be focusing on directing too. But the director they had selected, who worked in television just like Henson and Oz, didn't really have any experience working with puppeteers. And I guess it was not a good experience for everyone involved with him as director. So they're like, if we do any more of these, we're going to have someone who at least has an understanding of how puppetry works, even if they're not a puppeteer exactly. And so Henson, I guess because the Muppet movie was, it was a huge hit. It was one of the highest grossing movies of that year. So I guess they're like, yeah, you could direct the next one. And so he does, on top of everything else he's doing in this movie.
Yeah. And the Muppet movie was one of those films, nobody saw that coming. Like, I don't think anybody expected it to have the success that it had. And it's funny because, you know, the Great Muppet Caper, when you look at it from a box office standpoint, was considered a failure because it didn't make as much as the Muppet movie. And a lot of people debated, like, why didn't it? Was it the title? You know, like I think even Jim Henson was even on record as saying, like, maybe we shouldn't have used the word caper in it. It maybe didn't quite land with people. I don't know what it was. But yeah, it is by far my favorite Muppet film. I think it is easily up there in that, like, the Empire Strikes Back discussion. It's the sequel that surpasses the original. It takes everything the original did that was so great and just takes it to the next level. Also, in rewatching it, this is like the most meta film ever made. I swear to goodness, man. Like, it is so meta. It's meta before meta. And I think it's one of those movies that people didn't quite know how to take it when it came out in 81. And like now you're like ready for that because that style of humor has been around a little bit more. It's almost like the proto Deadpool, you know, breaking the fourth wall. It's proto Freakazoid breaking the fourth wall. It's one of those movies that, like, its influence, I think, is seen in so many things that you don't even realize it's influencing. And it's one of those movies too. Like, I had the joy of seeing this in the theater. So I was 5 years old and my dad took me to see it. And we both just laughed so hard at this movie. And my dad was laughing at things, obviously, I did not get. But there's such a, in rewatching it, I mean, the humor is outstanding. It's the best humor I've ever seen in a Muppet film. But B, again, much like the first film, there is such a warmth and magic and charm to it that just you just can't really duplicate that. My thing about this movie, I've got 4 words for this movie: Miss Piggy, Charles Grodin. Goodness gracious, they are absolute forces of nature. Charles Grodin is like one of the best humans to ever be in a Muppet film because his relationship with Miss Piggy, like, you really, like, Charles Grodin doesn't phone it in. Dude didn't have to go that hard, but he goes that hard, and it's absolutely outstanding. It's some of the funniest stuff I've ever seen in a movie. Him with Miss Piggy backstage at the fashion show. Oh my god, dude! Like, it's breathtakingly funny to me. It's great.
Yeah, it's I'm glad you mentioned that because I wanted to bring that up, especially because my guest and I both, for the Muppet movie, we talked about, you know, how great it was, how revolutionary it was and like, it doesn't get really discussed in the same breath as some of the other films, but what it did with puppetry, like seeing puppets like full body and everything, it really was a revolutionary film. And I think that movie has strengths this one doesn't, but this one has strengths where this, like, I feel like the original Muppet movie, the soundtrack is a little bit better with the songs.
Well, you've got Paul Williams on that soundtrack, and that's a big part of it right there. Paul Williams was a big collaborator with them on several things, including In Otter's Jug Band Christmas. And you know, Paul Williams, one of those great composers. Like, he's just, you know, it's funny. He always says, "I'll only be remembered for the Love Boat theme," and I'm like, "No, man, you're gonna be remembered for a lot more than that." It's his contributions can't be, you know, forgotten. And I think the Muppet movie is a much sweeter, you know, kind of film. It really is. It's very warm. It's like a big warm fuzzy sweater or a warm fuzzy blanket that you put on.
Exactly.
What I love about the Great Muppet Caper, though, is it's like it's like the Muppets take on, like, a spy movie, a heist movie, you know, a crime film. And I love the fact that it went for, I mean, they swung for the fences with some of the visual things they do. I mean, the scenes of the Muppets all on the bikes, like,
yes.
I mean, like, there are so many shots in this movie where I was watching, I'm like, how in the hell did they do that in 1981? And I understand there's a lot of remote controlled puppetry they did, which, man, that's like in 1981. And you got to remember they're actually shooting this in 1980. That's some, like, next level stuff, man. Like, they were really pushing the envelope. So you got Kermit, you know, in the first movie, you got him on the bike and people went nuts over that. They're like, oh my gosh. So, like, well, we got to up that. So here's Kermit and Miss Piggy at the same time on bikes. And then here's the rest of the Muppet crew coming up on bikes. And it's just like, I don't know how they did it. I really don't know how they did it, but it looks amazing. And, you know, while this movie doesn't have the Paul Williams soundtrack, it does have some real bangers on the soundtrack.
Oh, yeah. The opening song is great.
It's stunning. It's absolutely wonderful. I love how big budget and crazy it is. This movie for me is just like, it's the definitive Muppet film. It's got the warmth, It's got great music. It's got amazing puppetry. It's got a level of humor that is still to this day, they have not surpassed it in a Muppet film. My God, I mean, to me, the joke that always gets me is the whole thing about how nobody can tell Fozzie and Kermit apart because they're brothers. And the scene where Jack Warden picks up the picture of their father, and it literally is a green Fozzie Bear with like Kermit eyes and the Kermit neck frill and stuff. Like, that's the greatest gags ever put into a film. I will die on that hill. That's one of the funniest things I've ever seen. And I love when the guy and the girl go walking by Kermit on the bench, and she's like, "Look, Daddy, it's a bear." And he's like, "No, that's a frog. Bears wear hats." Like, it's just an ongoing joke, man, and it just keeps going. When Kermit and Fozzie are looking at each other in the mirror, and Fozzie's like, "Which one's me?" And like, "You're the one on the right." It's like, it's just outstanding, man. Like, that joke it's beautiful. It's absolutely hilarious. I love it. It's great. Everything with Charles Grodin and Miss Piggy is just beyond the veil of awesome. I mean, the other thing too, like the cameos in this are amazing. I swear to God, John Cleese in this movie is on a whole other level. Like, that whole sequence with him and his wife at the house, like, I'm not kidding. That so freaking funny. Like, it's like a Monty Python sketch that got thrown into a Muppet film, and I absolutely love it. It's just great. Peter Ustinov coming back to do a cameo and getting to do one with Oscar the Grouch. Like, man, like, there's just so much awesome.
And that's a meta joke too, because when Miss Piggy throws him out of the truck and he lands and Oscar pops up and he's like, "What are you doing here?" "Just a cameo." "Me too."
Yes, because Peter Ustinov does it in the first one too, and it's like, man, this is great. And then that's Carol Spinney's second cameo, because Big Bird has a cameo in the Muppet movie. So, they brought in Carol Spinney for that, which I thought was fantastic. So, yeah, I mean, like, there is just so much to love about this movie. I mean, Gonzo and you got to remember, my three favorite Muppets are Gonzo, Fozzie, and Kermit. So you've got the three of them as like the core of this movie. I mean, Diana Rigg, dude. Diana Rigg. Like, the whole scene where she first meets Miss Piggy and she's telling him all about, like, her brother and everything. She's like, "Why are you telling me all this? It's plot exposition. It has to go somewhere." It just goes right.
Well, and that joke carries when later on in the film where they're planning the heist and they're going off all their which I love the back and forth. You see on his office door.
Yeah, he's a parasite.
But I love the back and forth of them with like their very professional tools, and then the Muppets are like rubber chicken, whoopee cushion.
Yeah, it's amazing, and like, they don't even have most of the stuff. It's fantastic.
Yeah,
it's so funny. That's like, even the opening where they're talking about the credits. What does BSC mean? Well, I don't know. It's Oswald Morris, who was also the cinematographer for The Dark Crystal. Like, it's like, I mean, other amazing films like Oliver and Scrooge and all kinds of huge movies. But the fact that they're even meta in the opening credits, man. Like, like even I remember as a kid, the first thing in the movie is Animal taking his thing on the MGM lion. And I lost my mind laughing at that in the theater. I distinctly remember, like, that's one of the hardest things I've ever laughed at as a child, because I had seen enough MGM films to see the opening with Leo the Lion. So as soon as that thing came up and Animal came up into it, I was like, "Oh my God, I get it." Like, my 5-year-old brain was like, "I get that joke." And it was so funny to me. And my dad, laughed his butt off at it too. So it's like, it's really amazing how they were able to, shoehorn in jokes that anybody can get. And there's definitely jokes that adults are going to get a lot more than the kids are. It's there's a whole lot going on. There's so much going on in that movie. I mean, like, one of the things that doesn't get talked about enough is the movie poster by Drew Struzan. That movie poster is gorgeous. And I had the glasses for McDonald's. So, it's like, The Great Muppet Caper was a big deal for me, man. It was huge. And it was the first Muppet film I saw in the theater. So there's a big part of it there too. But this is just one of those movies that, like, it's so funny and it's so effortlessly funny. Like, I'm like, dude, how many kids got the joke in when they're at the big the dinner sequence and stuff, where Gonzo's going around taking pictures and he takes a picture of the older guy and the younger woman, and he's like, "Well, I just thought you might like a picture of you and your wife." He's like, "Well, my wife's not feeling well," and he's like, "Well, I'm so sorry to hear that. Maybe I can give you this picture." He's like, "My wife's at home." How many kids got that joke, dude? No one got that as a kid. As an adult, that's funny as hell, man. Like, well done.
And Jim Henson is one of the people
Yeah,
in
he's
the
one of the
restaurant.
people the personally takes a picture of. Yeah, it's Jim Henson. It's beautiful. And apparently Frank Oz is in the opening sequence with the newspaper when
Yeah,
Jack Warden flies him. Apparently he's there somewhere. I didn't see him last night, but he's there somewhere.
I guess you can just see his head. They said he was balding man in the
Yeah, there you go. But see,
no.
like, again, like Jack Warden, dude, Jack Warden didn't have to go that hard for that part. And every time he slams the desk and they jump up, like it's fantastic. It's so great. Like, and then when he's like, you don't even look alike. And he's like, that's because Fozzie's not wearing his hat. And he puts it on, and Jack Warden just goes, oh yeah.
Well,
it's just perfectly delivered, man.
I don't know. I guess every time now I'm going to watch an older movie with a great character actor playing a newspaper editor. I'm like, oh, Jack Warden would have been a decent Perry White. But now
Jack Warden would have been a decent Perry White. Yes, he would have been.
Look at all these actors they considered. I would have loved almost any of these guys to act opposite a Muppet.
Oh yeah, they were all.
Tom Bosley, Jackie Cooper, who was Perry White.
Yeah.
Hume Cronin, Charles Deering, who was the bad guy in the first one, Ed Asner, who basically is already playing that part as Lou Reed on Mary Tyler Moore, Harvey Korman, Walter Matthau. I would have loved to have seen Walter Matthau act opposite a Muppet.
And I'll be honest, Harvey Korman, just now that we've said that name, like the fact that he never got to is a crime. Harvey Korman would have been amazing with the Muppets.
Jack Klugman and Jack Lemmon, like any of those guys would have been great.
Those would have been top tier. But Jack Warden is perfect. Like, I mean, at the same time, like, yes, all those names are great and would have been fantastic. But Jack Warden is excellent in that scene, man. He is absolutely awesome. I mean, what I love about it is that every like actor in it, they all get the assignment. They don't treat the Muppets like Muppets. They treat them like other actors, which they should. That's what you're supposed to do. Diana Rigg and her interactions with Miss Piggy are fantastic. I mean, there's also like another little line that I caught when she's there, the thing sitting beside of Mickey, and then they're watching the thing going on, and he's like, he's like, is that your new secretary? And she's like, that is her. And he's like, she's amazing. She's like, there's only 25 words per minute. She's average.
45. Yeah. Like, yeah.
Like, man, I mean, that's a great line, dude. I wouldn't have got that as a kid. I don't even think I even caught that as a kid. So it's like, there are so many jokes in this movie that just work. I mean, like, there's really not one that doesn't for me. Like, I didn't rewatch it and think, oh, that didn't age well, or that's not. No, it's all funny. It's all cute. It's all great. I mean, the Happiness Hotel song slaps. I want that on record right now. That's an amazing song. And it's the first time they ever went kind of PG with the lyrics when Janice says, and the whole place has gone to hell. So like, that's a big deal. It's groundbreaking. But like, dude, the music, like when they're like driving to the mansion to stop the theft of the baseball diamond, man, that's got a groove to it, man. Absolute groove to it.
The pizza gag, man. The pizza gag.
Dude, the pizza gag. Like the fact that every one of those Muppets sneaks in behind that guy is so funny. And it's just the whole thing of like, well, it says right here, pepperoni and double cheese. He's like, but I hate pepperoni. Why would I have ordered that? The fact that he opens the gate to have this full conversation, and they just walk on past, like, well, you can give it to the dogs, and he's like, oh, well, thank you, and like sincerely appreciates the pizza. It's great, man. It's awesome. It's just it's so. And another neat thing I caught last night when they get inside to steal the baseball diamond. The room that has all the stuff they have to shut off, I kept looking at it and I was like, that looks like Star Wars stuff. Well, it turns out that one of the art designers on Star Wars was the production designer for the Great Muppet Caper, and that's why it has Star Wars look to it. And I was like, that's got to be it, because I kept thinking, like, so I looked up like Great Muppet Caper, like Star Wars props, and I found this tweet where someone said, like, did you know that so and so, who was the art director on Star Wars, did this for the Great Muppet Caper? And someone underneath that put, he definitely has a style. And I was like, yeah, it's so cool because it has that Star Wars look to it. And I was like, that's such a neat thing there. I love the fact that the film was actually shot in London, so it's all authentic, which is great. I love they really go hard on having the Muppets out in the world, the Happiness Hotel shuttle bus, and all those moving Muppets on that bus when they're driving through the city, and cars are around it and everything. Like, it's all real, man. It's all tangible. It's all done in camera. And I think that's the thing that really impresses me. There are so many in camera shots in this that normally you'd see things like strings or wires or rods. They're not there. They're absolutely not there. I mean, I know that they're there, but you don't see them. Like, they really hid them better than almost any film I've ever seen with puppetry like that. It's really astounding work.
Oh, I'll get to this, but talking about the baseball diamond sequence, I love that it's called a baseball diamond, and then they literally end up basically playing a game of baseball with that diamond, trying to get it.
I love that the cushion it sits on looks like a mitt. I love that.
Right?
Overhead shots, the cushion looks like a catcher's mitt or a baseball mitt. It's fantastic. Yeah, and then they really do end up playing baseball. Yeah. No, as a kid, I didn't even get the baseball diamond joke. I didn't get it. Like, I didn't get baseball. And it's like, now, of course, like it's obvious as hell, but it's great. It's a fun little joke, and they play it very well. I mean, every cameo in the film works for me. Every actor in the film works for me. Charles Grodin, I really cannot say enough. I love when they have the big Busby Berkeley, musical number with the waters, the swimmers and all that stuff, and you have Charles Grodin dubbing, like that song. And when he like sets up Miss Piggy to get arrested, and she's being held up, she's like, "You were dubbed, man!" Like, she like literally calls him out on the fact that they dubbed his voice. And she's got handcuffs, and she's like, "You're awful." She's like, "You were just dubbed anyway." It's just great, man. Like, call him out, man.
Apparently, that was a very difficult scene to shoot, and Frank Oz had to do 3 days of scuba training for that.
Oh, God. I can only imagine. And it's. I did look in the credits though, and it's funny. Susan Backlany, who is Chrissy in Jaws, is one of the swimmers in that, because she actually got the job as Chrissy because she worked at Greenland. So she's actually there. So Chrissy, there is a Jaws connection to the Great Muppet Caper.
Oh, cool. But what I love about this movie is that it does the thing that people play, because I'm sure you've seen the game, like, where it's like, remake any movie with Muppets and you only keep one human act.
Yeah.
I mean, they basically did that with this. This is like you said, this is them doing a like a heist film, like a journalism investigative film. It's like kind of like a 40s style romance. It's like a His Girl Friday type of. Like, you get the callback of Kermit wearing his news reporter outfit from Sesame Street.
Yep.
Yeah, and
there's so much fun, and it's such a. I mean, again, to me, like, I like other Muppet movies. I love the Muppet movie, Muppets Take Manhattan. Muppet Christmas Carol and stuff. It's all great. Even the newer reiterations are fine. But to me, the Great Muppet Caper, it's rather peerless to me as far as like what a Muppet movie is, and to me, the Muppets were always like this sort of controlled chaos, and this film is controlled chaos for like 90 minutes. It's got stuff going on all over the place. There's multiple levels to the script and what's going on. There's A level, plot, B plot, C plot, even kind of a D plot. It's all going on, but it's all deftly handled. It all comes together at the end, and it just works out. I mean, it's one of those movies that I don't even know how it got like made. Like, it's so spectacular and so ahead of its time, not only in the storytelling style for a kid's film, but especially like in the technology for the puppetry and stuff. Like, it is so ahead of anything at that time. It was just, I mean, it's funny. I was looking at some of the reviews for it, and it's like amazing how many like 2-star reviews or like 2.5-star reviews, because it's like people weren't ready for the humor of this film. I really don't think they were. And I think today that film would get like massive, love, because it is so meta. It is so fourth wall breaking. People would be like, "Oh my God, this is like one of the funniest things I've ever seen." And to me, I felt that way about it the first time I saw it. I just thought it was absolutely the funniest thing I'd seen with the Muppets. And no Muppet movie ever has quite touched that level. Muppets Take Manhattan gets close. The Muppet movie gets close. From after Henson passes, the quality of the films is a little wonky to me. They started getting a little more like pop culture, like modern humor type stuff. Like, they weren't. The Great Muppet Caper is when you watch it. It's funny if you watched it in 1981. It's funny if you watch it in 2023. Like, there's no loss in the humor there. It's not as timely. It feels more timeless. The newer films don't quite feel as timeless to me. They feel very much of their time, and they don't quite have that timelessness of the Muppet movie and the Great Muppet Caper and the Muppets Take Manhattan. I mean, yes, they're products of the 70s and 80s, but the storytelling, the music, the jokes, the humor. It's all very timeless. It's all still very funny today. You can still relate to it today, and I think that's something that the later Muppet movies, they're great. Don't get me wrong, I still enjoy them, but they're not quite at that level of the Jim Henson. Brian Henson's done an admirable job, but he's not Jim Henson. This is the best, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they're never going to recapture the formula that were in those first 3 films. I think, the 2 Brian Henson films,
you got to remember Frank Oz. Frank Oz is a big part of that too, though. You mentioned that earlier. You don't have Jim Henson without Frank Oz. You don't have Frank Oz without Jim Henson. Like the two were very, like they were a pair. And those 2 minds coming together to make a film, even though Henson directed it, that Frank Oz was there guiding him with like ideas. And those 2 brains working together, and boy, they just meshed. They just absolutely meshed. When you have that kind of synergy, you can't duplicate that. You can't. It's not possible. You just can't duplicate it.
Yeah, and I don't think they get enough credit for being 2 of the best comedic duos in showbiz history. Like,
oh, not at all, not at all.
Yeah.
I mean, dude, the Muppet Show has some of the best jokes I've ever seen on television. The Muppet movies, those 3 in particular, have some amazing, amazing jokes that just work. Even Sesame Street has those moments that just absolutely work.
I was just saying they were Bert and Ernie in the morning, and then they go off and be Kermit and Miss Piggy at night.
And Frank Oz as Miss Piggy in this film, like, is the best Miss Piggy's ever been to me. I think this is the best Miss Piggy movie ever. Like it just, she is a force of nature in this film, man. She is an absolute force of nature. I mean, like, I even like how she gets the motorcycle. The stunt truck goes driving by, hits a bump, and the motorcycle with the uniform just rolls around. It's like, what a convenient thing. And then the next thing you know, Miss Piggy is geared up and she's on that motorcycle, and it's outside.
I love the kissing gag where they kiss between the plexiglass, and she gets his mustache and he has the prison bar indented on his face. Yeah. Like,
it's so fantastic.
But
and that's a joke. It's a throwaway joke, man, but it's great. It's absolutely great.
But yeah, the 2 Brian Henson movies, they have the benefit of basically doing what those memes and things. They plop the Muppets in a very classic literary tale, right? So that's kind of already just like we're doing this story. Yeah.
Right. When you've got Michael Caine and Tim Curry, like, a lot of the heavy lifting's done, let's be honest, because both of those guys didn't have to go that hard, and they sure do. And they are standouts in those movies. But when you've got that kind of, help, and like you said, you're just putting them into a literary piece, not an original piece. There's the big difference. The Muppet movie, The Great Muppet Caper, and The Muppets Take Manhattan are all wholly original pieces created by Jim Henson and Frank Oz. And that's something you can't take that away from them. That is all wholly them. It's much easier to do the Muppets in a setting like, again, A Christmas Carol, Treasure Island. Like, that's an easier thing to just throw them into. And I think that's where, again, a lot of the stuff with the modern Muppet films, that's where I think it kind of is not as strong because there's not as much originality. Even the Muppets, the reboot for that, which was cute, it still kind of ends up being almost like a remake of the Muppet movie in a lot of ways. Like, it's almost
in a sense, it's almost like the Force Awakens of the Muppet movies.
Yeah,
but
it really is. No, that's a great analogy for it. It's the Force Awakens of the Muppet movies. Yeah, absolutely.
But I think I think Jason Segel's genuine love comes through on that film, though. Like, his love of
it absolutely does, and it's a very funny film. I mean, like, there are some great jokes in it, but even still, like, there's just something about hearing other people voice Kermit and Miss Piggy and Fozzie that they sound like them, but they don't. Like, there's just something missing there, and I think that's another thing too.
The guy who was Kermit was better than whoever just did Kermit recently. They did like a haunted house special, which is directed by the punk from Star Trek 4. I guess he works in puppetry. Whoever's doing Kermit now, or did Kermit for that special, sounded way off. I think it was Steve Whitmire who took over after Henson died. And he's not quite the same, but there's a little bit there that's similar, but
Yeah.
not. But you're never going to recapture that voice, which
No.
I thought was funny that they didn't use Rolf for so long. I'm like, because it's like Kermit's the one that sounds like Henson.
Yeah, Rolf you can play around with him easier than you could Kermit.
Yeah, but you can't do a Muppet thing without Kermit. Like that's it's just not going to happen.
He is the heart and soul of the Muppets. I mean, there's no disputing that. He is to the Muppets what like Big Bird is to Sesame Street. You just can't have it without them, And when Carol Spinney retired, I mean, Big Bird's just never been the same, and nor has Oscar. And it's it's one of those things like you don't understand like how when it comes to like the Muppets for me, whether it's the Sesame Street gang or the Muppet Show gang, there is such a primal connection that we all have to them because they were so instrumental in our childhood. And there's something so inherently beautiful about that these people with their creative abilities, that's the route they took. That's the avenue they took. They could have went and done anything, but they decided that children deserved better programming than what they were getting. They decided that children deserved to be talked to like little human beings, not like little babies. They decided that children needed, something to really give them like a meat and potatoes to their daily, things that they watch. And that is so beautiful. Like it's so absolutely beautiful. And I'm glad that they were able to do other things outside of it. Frank Oz in particular has done all kinds of stuff outside of the Muppets, but the fact that they were able to take their talents and their abilities and to use it for something like that, and it really shaped generations of children. Still does. I mean, Sesame Street is still out there doing it, but the fact that they were able to do that and then bring that to life with film is really crazy to me. Like it's an awesome, powerful thing. And again, going to see the Great Muppet Caper with my dad, that's one of my first like movie memories, and it's one of those that I remember it with the greatest fondness of memories. And so the Muppets are really kind of hardwired for those of us who grew up with them. Like they really are. They're hardwired in who you are. They helped you determine your sense of like, right and wrong. And, they helped you learn, like how to count, they helped you learn how to spell, how to, say your ABCs. And then they were there with you, to bring you, things like Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas and the Muppet Show and the Muppet movies and, all these wonderful things. They were a part of your childhood. And I don't know, there's just something about that that's so special to me. And it's why the Muppets, for those of us who grew up in that time period, while we've never forgotten them, why we'll always love them, even with the changes in voices and stuff, we still love those characters and who they are and what they meant to us. And I don't know, that's something I guess I use the word primal. It's so primal. It's so like instinctive with us. Like it's in our DNA. These characters are like, I don't know. It's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I think another important lesson that the Muppets teach us besides, what Sesame Street did and, not talking down to children, treating children as they're humans too. I think the Muppets are like, you can be your weird, crazy self, and that's okay. Yes. And also, family is not always who you're blood related to. Sometimes it's the people you find in your life that love you and like you for who you are and want to elevate that up for you and want to be your support system.
It's one of the beauties of that. I mean, my favorite Muppet was always Gonzo. And of course, Gonzo is the weird one. They don't even know what he is. And I love when they're in the airplane in their crates. There's frog, there's bear, and then there's whatever. They don't even know what Gonzo is. And I always loved Gonzo because he was so weird. But again, I was a weird kid too. So maybe I just gravitated towards that. But all of them are weird in their own special way. And it's great that they can all be together and be friends and just love each other and accept each other. So yes, I would agree there is definitely that. And it's what I love about that is that it's just subtle. They don't beat you over the head with it. It's just there.
No.
You instinctively pick up on it. Your brain picks up on it. It's almost subliminal, but it's there. And I think, that's why I think the Happiness Hotel song so much is you've got all of these crazy guys all coming together for this, and they all live in this hotel and they all live there happily. Everybody's, good. Everybody's fine. And, they all help out Kermit, they help him go on his date. help him, get Miss Piggy. They help him get Miss Piggy set free and stop the baseball diamond theft. Man, they're all in it with him. Man, they all back him, and that's there in the Muppet movie, and it's also there in the Muppets Take Manhattan when they all come back to do the show. There's something so beautiful about that, and I think you really hit on the big thing that family is what you make. And that's what I really love about the Muppets is I feel like that definitely is a strong theme in what they were doing. That your family isn't always just who you're born to; it's also the family that you make, and that coexistence that they all have that's so beautifully there. They all have different personalities, different backgrounds, different loves, different passions, but they all live together peacefully, and it's great. It's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, and yeah, I'm a lifelong fan, and so many things like them putting John Cleese in this. One, because I shot in London, so why aren't you not going to get John Cleese? But combining the Muppet humor with the Python humor for me is like chef's kiss. Like that's my two happy places. Combined together, because those are the two things I like to watch when I'm feeling sad is like Mighty Python or the Muppets, because it's like, I need to pick me up.
I love the setup for it too, because it's like he's sitting there with his boring wife at their boring table, and she's just talking about how dreadful the weather is and stuff, and you just hear Miss Piggy, and he just kind of leans back and looks up, and she's like, "Well, what is it, dear?" And he's like, "It's a pig climbing up the side of the house."
And they're just so matter of fact about everything. Like they're not even shocked. And he's like, "You remember that pig? Well, they were in the closet with the lizard, and they wanted a restaurant. Yeah. A restaurant, right? Well, that's not really a restaurant. That's more of a supper club."
Yeah, the fact that he says that and then she says that is such a great joke, man.
Well, and I love how it starts out like, "Oh, the weather was dreadful today. Actually, it's been dreadful the past couple of days." And then she's like, "I'd like to go with you." And he's like, "Well, that's not that." She's like, "Well, I haven't been out of the house in 12 years. And he's like, "Well, the weather's been so dreadful."
I love too that they age up John Cleese so that he matches his wife, because they totally gray him up. It's so great.
Yeah.
I mean, even as a kid, I didn't know necessarily who John Cleese was. But that scene always made me laugh because of the matter-of-fact politeness that's given. That John Cleese is so genuinely polite to them with the way he hides the poker behind his back, and it's just like, oh, well. he's like, "Well, I would recommend this." He's like, "Well, this is really more of a supper club." And she's just like, "Oh, okay, thank you." And they just walk out. But just the politeness of it, the British politeness of it all. It's what's so great. Even when they first land, the actor there, and I can't think of his name, but he's done a lot of things. But he was.
Oh yeah.
But the way he's all like, "Well, whoever you are, whatever you are, welcome to the United Kingdom." And he's just so. But then when they're like, "Hey, thanks for the help," and he stands up and just looks at them like, "What the hell?" and just walks off. It's that look he gives them of just "Don't speak to me out loud. I don't want people to know I talk to you." And he just
Robert Morley.
That's it. Oh my God!
Maybe the most British person in the movie.
He is by far the most British aristocratic character ever. He's great. But
the great joke there when he's like, "Welcome to Great Britain," and Fozzie's like, I wanted to be in England," and they're like,
"You are." It's so funny. There's so much going on in every scene. That's the thing I love about even the opening sequence. You've got the setup of Kermit and Fozzie and Gonzo being news reporters and stuff. You've got Charles Grodin's introduction where he steals the jewels. You've got Diana Rigg's introduction. You've got car crashes and fighting and cars speeding away, and you got Sweet'em still trying to be in the movie, and he keeps falling into the pit or getting stepped on. It's
poor Sweet'em.
He's poor Sweet'em. I also like when they're singing "Hey, a movie," and he's like, "Is there any way to stop it?" It's great. Because in the first movie he tries so hard to be in it. And then in this one, he's right there, and he falls into the sewer, and that's it. It's all done. It's so great, man.
And
but it's you got all of this going on, and it's all this opening musical number. And I mean, it's big and huge and wonderful. But it's like, man, like it's again that controlled chaos. Like it's all there, man. It's all definitely handled. But man, there's so much going on in that opening, and I mean, it really comes out, both barrels blazing, man. I love it.
Yeah, and even though you can clearly tell that's like a film set, or it looks like a film set in that opening sequence, it's just so
Oh, it definitely
great.
is. But you have to, because you can't like shut down like complete roads and like build like trenches and stuff for actors to put their hands up there. You have to create that set. Like you can't just do that anywhere. You have to have that controlled setting. But it looks great. It's the one thing about it. I mean, the film. I mean, Oswald Morris definitely earned his paycheck. It's a great looking film. Like it really does look good. It's one of the things in rewatching it, I was like, man, this film looks stunning. He shoots the Muppets like real people. Like they don't ever look like they don't belong in the world. And I think that's a really like tough trick to pull off. But they look like they belong in that world in every single scene that they're in. And it's great because the actors definitely make sure they feel like they're in that world.
Right? The actors don't treat it as like it's something weird. And
the great thing is the way it's shot, again, your shot compositions, your colors and everything, they don't do anything to make them stand out like, hey, look, it's the Muppets. Hey, look, they're not real. They look real. They're shot so well. And it really is like a movie that every time I go back and look at it, I'm like, man, it looks great. It is such a good looking movie.
And you mentioned it, but I wanted to talk about it before we finish is, yes, we talk about put one actor, and Michael Caine and Tim Curry definitely are close runner-ups as maybe greatest actor to be in a Muppet movie, even though I heard like Michael Caine, there was a thing I just saw where it was like Michael Caine treated his Muppets like they were fellow actors, and Tim Curry's an actor who thinks he's a Muppet. Yeah. But Charles Grodin, maybe the greatest performance opposite of Muppet. Also, because I don't know if anyone else would believably, and I don't know how it's not cringy and weird, that it has sexual tension with a Muppet.
Yeah, no, it's so funny, and it's not cringy. That's the great thing about it. Is Charles Grodin knows just how far to take it before it gets to the realm of creepy. And Jim Henson knew, just how far to push it before it becomes creepy. It's so funny. Like every scene he's in with Miss Piggy, like the whole big dance number where he keeps like throwing himself into it and stuff, trying to reach out to her. It's hilarious. And then the whole thing where he's like, yes, I know we had to do the plan. I just wish it wasn't her. Like it's so great. I mean, it's so believable. That's the funny thing about it. He sells the concept completely, and it shouldn't work. It shouldn't work at all. But Charles Grodin was a phenomenal comedic performer. Let's put that up there right now. And if you've not seen Midnight Run, remedy that, ASAF&P.
Oh, God, I love that movie. Maybe my favorite buddy. It's not really a buddy cop movie, but I put it in that genre.
It goes in that genre. No, I'm right there with you. It goes in that genre. It's fantastic. But Charles Grodin was naturally a gifted comedic actor. And I think he definitely was in on the joke. Like, he totally got it. And I love the fact that he, plays this very flippant, very arrogant, parasite. It's even on his door. And the fact that, when he sees Miss Piggy, like, it's done so, like, it's on that perfect tongue-in-cheek border. You know what I mean? Like, you go either way off to the edge, and it doesn't work. He straddles the line. He's a Blade Runner, baby. He is running that blade. And it's absolutely, I think, the best human put into a Muppet film ever. And I don't know in that time period who else you could have put in that role that it would have worked as well. Charles Grodin is like the thankless job of that film. He does not get enough credit for his work in that movie. It is a hill I will die on. Charles Grodin is the best person to put that's ever been put in a Muppet film. And the stuff with him and Miss Piggy is the greatest stuff that's ever been done with a human in a Muppet film. It's the greatest stuff that's ever been done.
There was a lot written about this performance when he passed a couple of years ago, and they were like, has anyone else ever done it as well, or did his just perfect comedic timing and talents match what was going on with these characters in this movie? I mean,
I think it's a little bit of both.
It's a lot of great roles he leaves, and especially if you grew up in the 80s, like he was everywhere and things.
Yep.
So, yeah. And another thing I just realized watching this, because I don't know how many times I've seen this movie, but this is the first time in quite a while. This movie should be listed as one of the best movies about fashion, too.
Oh God, yeah. All the fashion stuff's hilarious. Diana Rigg is taking that ink pot and just pouring ink on that one dress, and everybody's like, but also too, let's be honest, Miss Piggy looks spectacular in the film. Her
I mean,
hair,
that whole
her
Buzz
costumes,
Berkeley sequence is great.
oh, it's stunning. It's stunning.
Yeah.
I
And
mean, like the way her hair flows in the water and stuff, the way that they got the air bubbles coming out of her nose, it's so great. Like they totally got the assignment. It's wonderful.
And yes, the late great Diana Rigg, who, for my money, people can fight me and argue with me, but I say she's the best Bond love interest. Why? Because she's the only one that got to be Mrs. Bond.
That's true. That is true. And
And
she, I mean, gosh, that woman was, I mean, not only a fantastic actress, she was just, I mean, just a beautiful human being. And I love the fact that she brings such gravitas to the part of Lady Holiday. Like, Lady Holiday is the most important person in the room, and you believe that every time you see Diana Rigg on screen. She's perfect. And you know, I think it's hilarious that Charles Grodin is her brother, but he doesn't have the British accent.
right, he's just Charles Grodin.
He's just Charles Grodin. It looks like Charles Grodin. Like they said, "Hey, Charles, go drink a couple martinis and then come to the set. We got you, baby." Like that's what it feels like. It's great. Like he is just on a whole other level, man. It's a different movie what he's in. It's fantastic.
But
For you, where does the Great Muppet Caper? Yeah, for me, it's my favorite. Where is it in your pantheon of the films?
it's definitely my personal favorite, with the Muppet movie right directly below it.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah. That
For
it's
me, yeah, they're both great movies in their own rights. Like you said, there are strengths in one that aren't in the other, and vice versa. But I think it's like if you want the warm, fuzzy Muppet movie, then watch the Muppet movie. If you want more of that sort of edgier comedy that they were known for, then the Great Muppet Caper fills that pretty well. And the Muppets Take Manhattan is kind of a blending of the two.
right. It's a blending of the
I
two.
thoroughly enjoy it. I thoroughly enjoy it. And as a kid, it's probably the one I saw the most because it seemed to be like on cable the most. Like even more than the Great Muppet Caper and the Muppet movie, I saw the Muppets Take Manhattan. And
Yeah, and
I love it.
there's a weird rights issue with that one too. For some reason, Disney doesn't have the rights to that one.
That's weird.
I don't know because it's that and Muppets from Space are the only ones that aren't on Disney Plus. Of course,
Weird.
most of the later ones were released by Disney, but
Yeah,
I don't.
Muppets and the Muppets Most Wanted were for sure.
And there are callbacks to this film in both of those movies. Almost the entire plot of Muppets Most Wanted is them just trying to do this movie again.
Yeah.
And in
Yeah,
2011,
it
Muppets, Miss Piggy's working in Paris at a fashion thing, so it's basically like, we're callbacking, which they kind of call back all three movies in that 2011 film.
They did. They really did.
Which I guess calling it The Force Awakens of the Muppet movies makes sense then, because that's kind of what The Force Awakens did. But
now, did you get to see, like, how old were you when you first saw The Great Muppet Caper? Were you a kid or were you old?
No, I was a child. I wasn't, it kind of all blurs for me. So my introduction to these characters, and apologies, don't, yell at me or throw a stone at me because of my age, but my introduction was the animated series The Muppet Babies was my introduction to these characters, because that came around in the late 80s, and that
cartoon was huge, man. Like it all spawns from the Muppets Take Manhattan with the little flashback sequence with them as little kids. Like that spawned the whole thing, and I remember like being stunned, like how many seasons Muppet Babies ran. I mean, it was a very long tenured cartoon.
Yeah, and then I got into, I can't remember if I saw the movies first or the Muppet Show first. I think I saw the movies first and then saw the Muppet Show, because I think the Muppet Show, they started rerunning on Nickelodeon at some point in my childhood. And I don't know which movie I saw first. I think I probably saw Muppets Take Manhattan first and then saw the other two. But yeah, I was pretty young. I was under 10. I was probably
That's where you need to be.
in that 6 to 8 range. Or
That's the
yeah.
perfect age for the Muppets, man. It really is. But as a kid, it was one of those things. Like the Muppets felt like I was getting away with something. Like, oh, this is so funny, and like my parents wouldn't think this was as funny as I do. Like, I'm getting away with something here. Like, there is something about that. It had that kind of vibe. I mean, Sesame Street was safe. It was fine. Everybody watched Sesame Street, but the Muppets felt like they had an edge to them for kids, and in a lot of ways, they did. I mean, the Great Muppet Caper definitely is. There's so much in this movie. I think if you love the Muppets and you haven't watched The Great Muppet Caper in a while, go back and watch it. I highly recommend that you do because A, it holds up, and B, I think I found watching it this time may have been the most I've laughed at it ever. Like there were just jokes I had forgotten about, jokes I completely missed. Like I think I laughed at it harder last night than I did like maybe since the first time I saw it as a kid when I was 5. It holds up so incredibly well. The jokes are very well delivered. If you like that meta humor that's all over the place right now, you will love The Great Muppet Caper. I mean, it really is like one of the first movies I can genuinely think of that really goes all in on the meta joke. Like there are so many references to the screenplay, to plot exposition, like the credits being out there and like, oh man, how much longer do we have for this? Like, it's just like, yeah, it's all there, man. Like
wait till the end.
Yeah, even if you watch through all the end credits, you get one more little moment with Gonzo, which is fantastic. That's a great little joke. Gonzo takes a picture and he's like, "I'll send you all copies."
Yeah. By the way,
it's just to me, it's the perfect Muppet film. Everything I want out of the Muppets is in this movie, basically.
That's a good estimation of this. It has the humor. It puts them in a movie plot. It's not just because the first film is basically like it's a road movie. It's kind of setting up the characters. It's basically an extension of the TV show. And then the third one is kind of like, okay, well now we're moving it to Broadway instead of movies, but it's sort of the same. We're putting on a show sort of thing. And this is them in a movie. Like this is them in like a movie plot and with all those jokes and everything. And BSC stands for British Society of Cinematographers.
Cinematographers, yeah. It's I love the fact that none of them know it because they're not British. It's great. Like, I mean, it's a simple little. Even that is a great little joke that like they're not British. They wouldn't know what BSC stands for. It's fantastic. Like again, like there's just something about this movie. It just. I mean, for me, it just checks all the boxes. It's got humor. It's got heart. It's got warmth. It's got comedy. It's got music. It's got dancing. It's got action. It's got, incredible like set designs and costume designs. And for Miss Piggy, her hair, it's pure fire. You've got the perfect mixture of live action people with Muppets. It's everything, man. I mean, the fact that this was Henson's first film is really what a job he did and what an undertaking it was. There is so much going on in this movie. In any one frame with the Muppets, there is so much going on. And I think that to me is just like a real testament to just how all in they were on creating like a Muppet, universe, that they were really all in on it. And this film, to me, I think more than even the Muppet movie did, really shows how far they were willing to just go into the realm of cinema and just really, like you said, put them in a movie, not just a Muppet movie, but an actual like movie scenario where there's, intrigue and there's theft, there's, setups, there's arrests, there's action, there's all this stuff going on. It's all there, man. It's all there in the kitchen sink. And to me, that's what makes The Great Muppet Caper, it's the standout to me. I mean, it really is. And it was when I was a kid and it is still now as an adult. It has aged beautifully. Goodness gracious, has it aged well. And it just really, to me, it's a real testament. This film ultimately for me is just a real testament to the creativity and the, let's just be honest, the genius that was the Jim Henson Frank Oz collaboration. I still think The Dark Crystal is their greatest achievement. On every level, The Dark Crystal is one of the most amazing films ever made. If you guys haven't talked about them yet, I'm glad I could spend hours on The Dark Crystal. But for me, the greatest Muppet film that they'll ever make was The Great Muppet Caper, because to me, it was the perfect blending of their two sensibilities with bringing, a real movie story to the Muppets, putting them in the real, film type story. It's the perfect Muppet movie to me. I mean, it really is. Again, like I said, everything I want in a Muppet film is in The Great Muppet Caper. And while I do love the other ones, they're great. It to me it stands up there, like, again, like in the discussion with The Empire Strikes Back, The Godfather Part 2, Aliens, like Blade 2, it's up there. It's that sequel that either is as good or surpasses its original, which is not easy to do. I think it's funny how it didn't make as much money and it didn't get as much critical acclaim in 81, but I think it's a movie that now, when people revisit it, they're much like a lot of films in the summer of 82, like Blade Runner and The Thing, they weren't ready for them then. But when you go back and watch them now, you can really appreciate just how ahead of the curve that film really was. And when it comes to comedy, The Great Muppet Caper is way ahead of the fourth wall breaking and meta curve that we would see, especially today. I mean, it's amazing how ahead it was.
I think the testament of how well a job they did, Henson and Oz, with this movie is that they were doing this for decades.
Yeah.
I probably became a Muppet kid because I was a Sesame Street kid, like early.
I think for most of us, that's how it went, because Sesame Street was my first introduction to that style as well.
Yeah, I mean, I had a Sesame Street room when I was a toddler. I had Sesame Street toys. I watched that Big Bird movie on repeat as a small child.
I'm going to say right now also, Follow That Bird is an absolute gem of a film. I will defend Follow That Bird all day long. I think it's one of the sweetest, most charming, most wonderful little road trip movies you'll ever watch. I will defend that film till the end of time.
And yeah, I think just a testament of working on Sesame Street and then developing the Muppet Show. And of course, Henson had been doing puppetry since he graduated high school.
Yeah, I mean, he'd been doing it for a long time, man.
This was his big moment to shine. And yeah, it's considered the 5th highest grossing Muppet film. The Muppets, the 2011, the Muppet Movie, The Muppets Most Wanted, and Muppet Treasure Island all made more money than The Great Muppet Caper. But I guess because the Muppet Show ends when this film comes out, and I guess it was enough of a success, or the first movie was so much of a success, he was able to make his ultimate blank check passion project, The Dark Crystal.
Yep.
So, yeah.
I mean, for me, I think it's so funny because when I was reading like some of the reviews and stuff, like as a kid, I don't remember anybody not liking The Great Muppet Caper. Like my friends and I all loved it, man. We thought it was just the best, but it was the Muppets. So how could it be bad? It's the Muppets.
Right.
But when I was reading some of the reviews and stuff, I'm like, wow, these people really missed the whole boat on this film. Like they just didn't get what they were doing. And I think it's a movie that was ahead of its time, much like I'll say The Dark Crystal was well ahead of its time. People were not ready for that style of storytelling from Jim Henson. They weren't expecting that shit at all. And I mean, The Dark Crystal goes hard, son. It does not pull any punches. It's great.
But it's a masterpiece.
There's no other way to describe The Dark Crystal. I get when people tell me they don't like it. Like I get it. I do. Especially kids who saw it who were like terrified from it. I get that too. But The Dark Crystal for me is Henson's and Frank Oz's like ultimate masterpiece. It's never been surpassed. And I don't think that it ever truly will. I don't think you'll ever see anybody really go that hard. Now, the Netflix TV series was really well.
It was really good.
I was so disappointed. The fact that we only got one season is so incredibly disappointing because what it was setting up was some pretty spectacular stuff, man. I mean, they went hard on that, but you'll never see anything like The Dark Crystal on a film screen again. Like you just won't. And for me, The Great Muppet Caper is sort of like it's weird to think that it was so sort of like the redheaded stepchild of the Muppet films there in that time period. And yet almost everybody I talk to will say that they either love it the most or it's one of their favorites. It's never, oh, I don't like The Great Muppet. I've never heard anyone say those words, like that I don't like The Great Muppet Caper. I've never heard that. I've never
But
heard that, and if someone did say
how
it,
many of
I would have to
those
call.
how many of those reviews at the time are those reviewers still alive? And two, how old were those reviewers reviewing that movie?
That's
You know?
Yeah, like Roger Ebert and Siskel were the ones that surprised me. Ebert only gave it 2 stars and said basically like the only people that think this is funny are the Muppets. But Gene Siskel gave it 3 out of 4 and said that Miss Piggy is like an absolute star in this film. That they really figured out how to utilize her at her best, and that it may be a little much for some, but in the end, the charm of the main characters, especially Kermit and Miss Piggy, carry the film well enough to be a good movie. And normally I agreed more with Ebert than I did with Siskel, but in this case I agreed with Siskel completely and thought Roger was completely wrong on this one. But not that it matters, they're both dead and they could care less what I think. But it's just one of those things where, to me, like a lot of people back then, it's funny how kids movies got reviewed like they were on the same level as adult movies. And it's like, you got to look at who the audience is for this film. And to me, The Great Muppet Caper, the best animated series for me of the past like 20 years, the ones that I go to the most are Regular Show, Gravity Falls, recently The Owl House, and
I've heard
Phineas
that's good. Yeah, those are all. I've heard those are all quality shows.
They all, to me, have that Muppet controlled chaos element to them. And they all have that beautiful blend of humor that's there for the kids, but there's plenty of stuff that's there for the adults that the kids will never get. I always joke, Regular Show feels like it feels like a show made for adults to watch with their kids. I love Regular Show with the fire, like the Force of 1,000 Suns, but it feels like something made for people our age to watch with our kids. The kids will laugh, sure, but it's mainly made for us. So that's the thing I love about The Great Muppet Caper, is like those things I just said, those things to me take a lot of inspiration from the Muppets and their fourth wall breaking and their meta humor. And this film, to me, is just all of that at its best. I mean, to me, The Great Muppet Caper for me it's a perfect film. There's not one scene in it that I don't enjoy. There's not one performance that I don't enjoy. There's not one song that I don't enjoy. There's nothing like that has aged badly or seems cringy or anything like now. There's nothing that would get it canceled. It just, to me, is the perfect Muppet film. Everything you could want out of a Muppet film is in this movie. It's all there, and it's done with such passion and glee and love. And the love is a big part of it, man. Like, you can tell everybody in that film, especially on the Muppet side, they bought all into the world that they created. They bought all in, and you have to, if you're going to do this, you all have to have the buy-in, and they all did. And it's just a movie that feels so timeless. And it's funny to me when you look at it, because you know how much work has to go into one of those movies. And it's funny just how easy it looks like it was done. It's so smooth. It's so beautifully done. It looks like it was the easiest thing in the world. And you know it absolutely was not. I watch those bike scenes and I'm still just like, how did they figure out how to do that? Like, it looks astounding. Like, when Kermit and Miss Piggy are riding around each other, I'm like, how did you do that? Like, I don't know. It's amazing. That's the thing. Like, anymore, it seems like when you watch things in movies, you're like, that looks good. I've seen CGI. I've seen puppets. That's great. You don't really get that jaw dropping like you used to get, you know? And it's so funny that going back and watching a Muppet movie made me do that. There's such magic in that because it's real.
That's true. There's very few films. Like, there's a handful of exceptions where you're like, wow, that was really like top of the art. But I don't know if there's very many anymore on a technical side for just special effects, because this is special effects. Puppetry is a special effect.
It is absolutely.
I mean, I think some people said that about Dune recently, and of course, the Avatar films are groundbreaking for what Cameron's doing. But I would say the last time I was truly just jaw dropped by what they were able to do on the screen is probably the Lord of the Rings, and then just what Andy Serkis did with motion capture with those Planet of the Apes movies.
Yeah, man, that's stunning work. It is. It's stunning work. But
But
again, it was just fun to see, like, to really feel that feeling of like, wow, that looks amazing. How did they do that in 1980, 1981? How did they do that? Like I love being that, blown away by a visual effect again. Like, it's been a while, man. It really has. Like, there is no CGI for them to use. There's nothing like that. It all has to be done in camera. It's not done in post. It's done in camera.
and they're shooting on film. It's not digital. Yes, they can't go immediately go back and look like that didn't look good. We got to do that again.
Yeah. It's all in film, and it's just like, man, how did they do it? And I loved feeling that way again. I mean, it's one of those things, like, I know it sounds cliche to say it, but I felt like a 5-year-old again watching that movie last night. It was still so fresh and still so funny and still so charming. And again, there were just visual things in it that I just was blown away that they had the ability to shoot that they could even think to do it in that time period, which again just goes to show the genius of Jim Henson and Frank Oz and that Muppet team, man. That core Muppet group back in the day, man, there was just genuine magic. It's the only way you can really describe it. It's genuine magic, man. Like, it's like Dick Van Dyke. It's just genuine magic. I don't know how it works. It just is. Dick Van Dyke is magical. He just is. Anything he's in, just immediately better because it's Dick Van Dyke. It's that kind of thing, man. It's that magic that we just don't have as much anymore. And it's I still love going to the movies. I mean, really, I'll tell you right now, the film that made me feel that way again was Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Oh my God, yes, that movie is amazing.
That movie, that film was like, it knocked me through the back of the theater, man. And to be honest, like, that film made me feel like movies felt to me in the 80s and the 90s when they were really just figuring these things out and getting, new ways to tell these visual stories. It hit me like that. And it's funny that a charming, sweet, funny Muppet movie would hit me that way again, but it sure did. So again, like, there's just magic to it that you can't, it's almost like there are just intangibles in these Muppet films. There are just intangibles. There's things that you can't duplicate it. You can't create it. It just happens. There's just a magic. There's a spark. And that's so much to me, again, the power of Henson and Oz. That when you think of the people who have had the most impact on children, they've got to be, perhaps the most influential. If not Mr. Rogers, then it has to be them. Like, I can't
right up there.
I can't think of anyone who's had more impact in the most positive of ways for children than Frank Oz and Jim Henson. And I can't think of two other people who've maybe had just more of an impact on the creative way that we look at cinema and the way that we look at television and the way that we look at children's programming. I don't think anybody will ever surpass what they did. I don't think it's possible. So I'll just end with saying, The Great Muppet Caper is the perfect Muppet film. The Muppets in that time period were just the most amazing creative things that you could imagine. If you weren't alive then, I hate the fact that you'll never quite understand or appreciate just how big a deal that they were. Like, I hope that you can appreciate them, but unfortunately, you'll never know what it was like growing up in a society where the Muppets were such a big deal. Go back and watch Rocky 3. Opening credits of Rocky 3.
That's true. They're in Rocky 3 because, which is funny that Rocky is a guest on the Muppet Show, because then Stallone pop up as a guest on the Muppet Show at some point.
He may have, but the fact that they put that in Rocky 3 goes to show you just how big a deal the Muppets were in that time frame. That didn't have to be in there at all, but it's in there because it proved a point that Rocky Balboa was that big of a deal that he was on the Muppet Show. Like, that really goes to show you what an impact those characters and that comedy had in that time frame. You just really, it's one of those things, like, you just can't understand it. It's like trying to explain Michael Jackson to people. It's like, if you weren't there in the late 70s and early 80s with Michael Jackson, you don't understand what the hype was about. Like, you don't get it. You only know all the crazy, weird stuff. You don't know what it was like when Thriller came out. You just don't get it. And with the Muppets, if you weren't around in that core time, that late 70s, early 80s bubble of the Muppets, you'll never quite understand just what they meant to so many children and adults. You'll never understand just what they meant to so many. It's not possible. And there's such a a magic to what they did and what they brought to TV and to movies. You'll just never see anything quite like it again. It's you can't duplicate it, you can't replicate it, you can't just think you can force it into existence. It happens from a special, rare kind of genius spark that so few of us will ever have. And Jim Henson and Frank Oz had that spark, and we are all better for it. I'll end with that.
So yeah, I completely agree with you 1,000%. I think you had mentioned it earlier. I think the thing that helps them and what makes them, not just with the Muppets, but everything they did, especially with children's program, is the same thing Mr. Rogers did. They treated children like human beings, and they talked to them about things that a lot of people don't think that we should talk to children about. They're like, no, we're going to talk about these things, and we're going to put it in an entertainment package, and you're smart enough and capable enough, and what you're feeling is okay. Your feelings are fine. Yeah. I had two more.
I was going to say really quick, we all talk about great crossovers, and everybody says, the end of Avengers Endgame is the greatest crossover of all time. I encourage you to look up on YouTube when Mr. Rogers stopped by on Sesame Street and got to talk to Big Bird.
Oh, man, that's got to be magical.
It's one of the most charming, wonderful things you'll ever see in your life. Just seeing Mr. Rogers share space with Carol Spinney's Big Bird, it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful.
Also, I think it's on YouTube. I don't know if it will be at this time next Christmas, but the Muppet Christmas special, I forget what it is. It's from the 80s, and it has
it's outstanding because they brought them all together.
Sesame Street and the Fraggles, but that's like the only way you can watch it. They have not re-released it on anything, and if you can find a VHS of it, it's like expensive.
Yeah, I can only imagine. It's so much fun. I remember when I first saw it, I laughed so hard at the Swedish chef seeing Big Bird and thinking that he wanted to cook him for their big family dinner because he was so big. And then Big Bird is so nice to him that he can't go through with it. It's one of the funniest setups I've ever seen. Like, it's so great. I will also say another one of those charming things that if you can find the original cut of it, and I do believe the original cut, the uncensored cut, and it's weird to say that there's a censored and uncensored cut, about Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas is just a spectacular thing to watch with your family at Christmas time. There is this weird edited version that takes out a joke and takes out Kermit the Frog. Kermit the Frog was originally kind of in it to kind of tell the story and kind of set up as the narrator. But there's a version that is out there that doesn't have Kermit the Frog, and they take out one of the lines that Ma Otter has about Henrietta Fox when she's like, I wish she'd just go walk off the dock, because Henrietta Fox is a total bitch. Let's be honest. She's a see you next Tuesday. And that line, I guess, was deemed too racy, so it was cut. And it doesn't make any sense because it literally cuts from her saying goodbye to Henrietta Fox to the Mr. Frog being like, or someone else, that's telling her, like, Ma, and it's like, telling her what? You took the joke out. You don't understand what she just said. So if you look for it on YouTube, you can find it. And if you look at the one on Amazon, if you see Kermit, you've got the right one. If you don't see Kermit and it just goes right into talking about, with Ma and Emmett on the river, don't watch that one. Find the one that has Kermit, because that's the one you want to see.
Yeah. Two more things before we call it a day. When you watch this as a kid, when they're like developing the photos in the bathroom, did you try to pat your head and rub your stomach at the same time? Yeah, absolutely. Me too. I was like, yeah, I could do that. And then we forgot to talk about Peter Falk, who just comes in and does his whole Peter Falk thing at the park, which for some reason I thought he was Columbo, but he's not being Columbo. He's just being Peter Falk.
He's just being Peter Falk, but my God in heaven, his whole thing, like, I know exactly what's happened, and the ridiculous story that I swear to God, I bet you Peter Falk just made up on the spot. Like, it feels like jazz. It feels like improv. It's like the craziest. And I just love how Kermit's like, oh, well, everything you just said was wrong.
Completely wrong.
Everything, none of that was right. I mean, it's like a 3-minute story. I mean, like, it's a chunk of time, but it's that kind of joke that I love it. It's why my favorite Disney film is The Emperor's New Groove. The hill I will die on of all hills is that The Emperor's New Groove is the greatest Disney movie ever made. Hot take, it's better than all your Disney princess BS. It's the best Disney movie ever made. And one of the big reasons why is because it has that kind of humor. It feels like a Muppet movie. You've got that scene where Kronk has thrown Cusco over the edge of the waterfall, and suddenly his shoulder angel and shoulder demon show up. And there's this whole conversation that they have. And when it's all done, nothing has been resolved to move the plot forward. Nothing has changed in what's going on. It was literally just an aside to have an aside. And that's what that Peter Falk scene felt like to me. It's just, they just almost like Jim Henson got a call that said, hey, Peter Falk's in London. Do you want to put him in this movie? Yeah, bring him by the park. Let's just have him come in and do something. And that's exactly what it feels like they did. And that scene is fantastic. I'm glad you reminded me of that because I had forgotten that he's in it. I had completely forgotten about that scene. And when he shows up, I just started laughing. I'm like, no way. And then that scene just goes on and on and on and on. And I'm just like, this is amazing. And the fact that Kermit, bless his heart, has so much patience to let him tell the whole story.
Yeah, he listens to the whole thing before he. Yeah, it's great. I love this movie. I love Jim Henson. I love Frank Oz. I wish they had gotten to do more things together. And
I genuinely can say, like, if I ever got to meet Frank Oz, I don't know that I could talk. Like, as soon as I heard his voice, that voice is the voice of Yoda, is the voice of Grover, is the voice of Miss Piggy. Like, I don't know that I couldn't not tear up if I ever got to meet Frank Oz. And I know I would have absolutely teared up had I met Jim Henson. What they have meant to the childhood of so many of us 70s, 80s kids, man. If there's an award that you could give someone, if there's like a sainthood you could put upon someone, there should be Saint Fred Rogers, Saint Jim Henson, and Saint Frank Oz, man. Like they deserve that. If you make a Mount Rushmore of children's, impact, those three are definitely on there, man.
I guess you put Bob Ross on the other one.
You could go with Bill Nye. You could go with Bob Ross. You could go with LeVar Burton because of Reading Rainbow.
LeVar Burton. Yes, put LeVar Burton on there.
That'd be my four. They were the four that made the most impact on my childhood, by and far.
Absolutely. Yeah, I probably would not love reading if it wasn't for LeVar Burton.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a great movie, and yes, you should check out Last Night in Soho because it also deals with London fashion. Not really a comedy, even though it's Edgar Wright, but it's a great little horror thriller. And yes, Diana Rigg,
it's on my list.
Great last performance.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how much you like Edgar Wright's work, but
I like his work, so I definitely want to see it. It's just one of those, like, it wasn't out in theaters for very long, and I just never got around to it, so now I just got to find it on streaming.
I think it's on HBO Max.
I do believe it is. Yeah, I think I've got it on my watch list, actually. I just got to remember to get to it.
Yeah, I loved it. Yeah, I loved it. He's one of my favorite filmmakers, and I'm meaning no disrespect to Tarantino fans, but I think he has that Tarantino style and talent without the cringy personality that Tarantino has.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. I mean, I love Tarantino's movies. I think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is one of the greatest movies I'll ever watch. But Tarantino as a person can be kind of a bitter pill to swallow. Granted, I'd like to just meet him one-on-one to just have a talk with him, not in front of a camera, not in front of someone's phone or anything like that, just to see how it would go.
Yeah.
I want to say that probably when he's not in front of a camera, he might be actually like just pretty damn cool to talk to when he's not being put in the spotlight and having to turn on his Quentin Tarantino. But I don't know. I don't know. Edgar Wright, I've never heard anything really bad about the guy, and he strikes me as a really, fun person to talk with as well. And his work is really outstanding work, man. You can't put a damper on him. He's a great director.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for, telling me why you love this movie as much as I do, if not more.
Yeah, it is to me. When you guys were mentioning Frank Oz and Jim Henson, I think that was the first movie I put me on for the Great Muppet Caper. it's the very best. It's the cream of the crop, man. So
Well,
thank
almost.
you
Oh, absolutely. Always a pleasure. Yeah, I think almost everyone put Dark Crystal and Labyrinth. So I was like, okay, okay, not everybody can get this one. Let me see what else they want.
No. And
Yeah.
they are both. They're definitely like top tier fantasy films. I mean, Labyrinth was one of those things, like, the fact that it was George Lucas and Jim Henson together, it was just like,
And Terry Jones wrote the script, so
yeah. And of course,
yeah.
David Bowie is phenomenal in it. I mean, he's perfect. He's David Bowie.
Which that is much creepier sexual tension than Charles Grodin and Miss Piggy.
Yeah. Let's be straight there. That's way worse than Charles Grodin ever thought about being as Mickey. That's not even the same territory. That's different. It's a different game, man. Different game. But The Great Muppet Caper, for me, again, thank you for giving me the chance to talk about it. It's such an influential part of my childhood. My first Muppet movie in the theater with my dad. So I have a very, very fond memory of it on that level. Like I said, I had the McDonald's glasses. I loved The Great Muppet Caper. It just was never surpassed for me. It's just the benchmark. Do you have like the rating system for the Jim Henson films? Like, are we doing the 5-1 on this?
I did not create one for this. I was like, I don't know, trying to come up with different names for a Henson or Oz movie. I was just like, let's just have a discussion about the movie. I think we both feel like this is a great film. Like, this is a 5-star, 4.5-star film.
It's a 5-star for me. I mean, like, it's go, if you haven't watched it in a while, man, go back and watch it. I think it's a rewarding experience, and I think I think if you're a little bit older from the last time you saw it, I think you'll just appreciate it on a different level. There's a lot of levels you'll appreciate: the filmmaking, the writing, the soundtrack. There are many layers to enjoy in this film, but I think what'll be really fun for you to go back is just to watch it as the whole experience and see that it absolutely still holds up, that it absolutely is still worth your time, and that it absolutely just goes to still prove that the Muppets, there's a magic to them that has never been beaten, will never be duplicated, and it's why the Muppets will stand the test of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about, you saw this with your dad and he laughed at things. Do you know the joke that got my mom when she watched this with me? Is we're gonna catch him red-handed. What color are their hands now?
The fact that there's a callback to that later,
yeah,
like by one of the adults, well, what color are their hands now?
Yeah. So
it's a great. There are so many jokes like that in this film that have little simple callbacks that have complete payoff. My dad and I remember my dad laughing very hard at the whole thing about Fozzie and Kermit being brothers. Like, he thought that was just hilarious. And it really is, like, the first thing I think of is Kermit and Fozzie just with their whole.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you see it now. It's just it's perfection, man. It's perfection.
I can certainly understand why some people might prefer the first film, just because what we mentioned, like, just that nostalgia, that comfortability. It's like a comfort watch. It's like a warm blanket, and it's kind of the first of its kind. But this is definitely the most entertaining Muppet movie
on every level for me.
Yeah.
Every level. Yeah, it's top tier, man. It's God tier for me. It's as a person who loves comedy, like, this movie doesn't have the right to be as funny as it is. It really doesn't, man. It does not have, man. Seriously, it's. Thank you so much for letting me come on and talk about it, because it does not get talked about enough, and it's just to me, I want to remedy that as best I can. So if even just the two of us talking, if there's one person who watches this and says, you know what, I need to go back and rewatch The Great Muppet Caper, then it's been worth it. It's been absolutely worth it.
Well, I think you pleaded your case, and I agree with you 1,000%. It's a great movie. I love it. It's my favorite of the Muppet films. I do think The Dark Crystal is their magnum opus as far as what they do with puppetry, but this is definitely the best Muppet movie, and I'll love it the rest of my life. And I do highly recommend, if you can find that biography, you should give it a read. It's really great.
Absolutely.
Yeah. thank you so much. Have a great weekend. I think we're gonna have you back soon for Little Shop of Horrors, which will just be a Frank Oz picture. So
Yeah, but man, what a picture that is. I adore that film, and I'm not always big on movie musicals, but man, that one is it's a top tier for me, man. Beautiful
oh,
film.
and I know it's not a heavy lift to make with this, but also one of the case in points where a remake exceeds the original. But still, nonetheless, it does.
Oh, absolutely. Goodness gracious.
Yeah.
It's a whole different movie.
Yeah, for sure. But enjoy the rest of your weekend. I hope it's
You
not
too.
too cold in West Virginia. It's not really that cold in Texas today, but
We're about in the low 50s, so it's not terrible.
Oh, okay. You're not too far off from us. This is the time of year where we get all 4 seasons within a week sometimes.
Yep.
So
That's West Virginia as well, man. We have those weeks as well. It's crazy.
so have a great day and thank you again for coming on the show. It's always a pleasure and I
Always a
love
pleasure.
I love nerding out with someone about the Muppets because it's not something that's normally people nerd out about.
We need to change that. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. So
Have a great weekend. Thanks again for the
you
time.
too.
We'll definitely talk to you.
All right.
Take
Thank you,
care.
Kevin.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.